So I've decided to add to my watch later list videos that I want to react to, usually just based entirely off the thumbnail and the title. And right now we have Why the Whatever Podcast is Under Attack by FBE Capital. I don't know who FBE Capital is. He looks like a nice guy. Not familiar with this content. I think that the Whatever Podcast, I think they do a good job at what they do, but I think what they do for the most part is really, really stupid. Or at least the clips that get shared with me or that like I see on my timeline or whatever. The stuff that gets recommended, it's always clips of them like trash talking girls who do like OnlyFans and stuff. And I always find that they repeatedly miss a few key points. And they try to say, oh, this woman, you're making a bunch of money now, but what about in a few years? What about in a few years? In a few years, blah, blah, blah. And it's like absolutely ridiculous, as though women just, as though their looks are guaranteed just going to rapidly decline. And that just is never the case. Like, it's not like men aren't interested in women, like, at beyond the age of 25. Like, it's just such an absurd premise. So let's check out the video. Hopefully they're not talking about the same old stupid crap.
It's beyond men. It's this.
What specifically?
Just like the fact of just like, you like, I don't know how to word this.
So
They also repeatedly do that same thing. Same problem with the Fresh and Fit podcast. They bring on these women who really, the women, I mean, granted, the women benefit a lot. They get more exposure. They get more followers. They make a lot more money off being on the podcast. But you have these women who haven't even thought that deeply about what it is that they're even doing with their premium content, like from a conceptual level, from a like theological level or whatever. So they're just ill prepared for the topics at hand, and there's really no reason for them to give a crap about what the topic at hand is, to really have something like poetic to say or to be able to like really argue their point really well. There's no reason for them to care to do that, because why would they? They're making tons of money. They're making more money than this guy on this podcast is. So why would they give a crap? They don't, and they shouldn't.
in July of 2022, Brian Atlas switches his Whatever channel from making very successful prank videos to hosting his first Whatever podcast episode.
And we are live.
Now, Brian got his inspiration for the podcast from the now infamous Fresh and Fit podcast in Miami that was blowing up at the time.
Yo, chat, what do y'all want, man? Y'all want us to kick her off the show? Or...
Now, Fresh and Fit is particularly ridiculous because they're like frequently like getting in these like over the top confrontations with the people who they invite onto their show, and they're kicking them off and they're being like super aggressive. They're just absurd. And even Fresh and Fit, fundamentally, they do make some good points, that the core message that they're trying to get across and that the Whatever podcast tries to get across when they're talking, when they're giving advice to men, is that, hey, you need to actually like be improving on your life and be confident, and you build that confidence through actual like improvement and improving yourself. And that's a really important core message. It's just everything beyond that gets so like muddled and weird and confused, and just becomes like bad advice in a lot of ways.
Or do you guys want her to say this show, man?
I think that's what you've learned in life.
Seriously, can you stop cutting me off?
Show if I'm not allowed to talk.
And even though Brian kept the core of the podcast the same,
Shout out to Fresh and Fit for the inspiration. Check them out on YouTube.
he decided to polish it up by taking a calmer and less combative approach towards his guests and relying more on the concept of just letting the idiot dig their own grave.
Would you describe yourself as a feminist?
Yes.
Do you believe in gender equality?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know how these podcasts get as popular as they do. It's just, yeah, you can like, yeah, I could get random 20-year-olds and I'm going to be able to talk better than they can and argue points better than they can. Okay, like, that's not impressive. That's not interesting to watch. Any of these women on screen, I'm sorry, but you're like 20 years old. Your opinion just doesn't matter that much. Like, you're not, why would they clearly haven't developed that skill they're just here to get more followers, and they get more followers. They get a lot out of being on here. But anybody who watches this kind of podcast and like thinks, oh, these women are so dumb, this host is so like mentally superior, like, you need to get a life, nerd. Like, oh my god, you're disgusting. You're absolutely disgusting. Not saying that all viewers of these podcasts are disgusting, but if you actually like get entertainment out of this aspect of it, like, yeah, obviously it's key. It's important to get like women's perspectives on some of these topics, but this stuff where it's like confrontational and arguing and trying to make them look dumb, it's just so gross and unneeded and stupid. Like, the hosts that do this kind of stuff, they're just dumb. They're just flat out dumb. They're dumber than the people that they're trying to make look dumb.
Don't you think you ought to split the bill on the first date?
No, because my main concern with gender equality is through, like, yes, in society, like, fixing that, and through, like, the system, but...
This turned out to be a brilliant move since it allowed Brian to perfectly market the Whatever channel on social media.
I mean, it's funny, right? It's funny that the host of this podcast says stuff to these women that, oh, you're successful and you're making all this money now, but everyone in your personal life knows that you do this, and everyone you encounter for the rest of your life is going to have less respect for you. That's what I feel like is true of the host of this. Like, what you're doing, buddy, for views, for all these views on all these videos, is you're doing this like exploitive, ridiculous content that makes you look like a jackass, that makes you look stupid, and everyone in your personal life, whether they're upfront with it now with you or not, they have way less respect for you, and they will continue to have less respect for you as your name is on garbage content like this. Yeah, you're successful, you've made plenty of money off of it, you get lots of views, you know, give yourself a pat on the back for that, but you're an absolute jackass and a tool.
By cleverly splashing the Whatever logo all over the studio.
Like why does it make you feel so good about yourself to try to make women look stupid by talking to like 20-year-old women who aren't at all prepared to talk about the subject matter that you're bringing up? Good for you, dude. You're like 30, you're in your 30s, and you can out debate a 20-year-old who has no preparation, whereas you obsess about these topics and have all your talking points down and ready to go. It's just really gross, man. And I don't even like dislike the host of this podcast that much. More of my like Fresh and Fit podcast looks way more ridiculous than this guy, to be fair. And this guy's a nice guy. Like, he does it in an infinitely nicer way than Fresh and Fit ever did. But it's still scummy content. That's what it is. And the content he's doing is just as scummy as these like OF models. It's just as scummy, but he just doesn't see it. And he's like delusional enough to think people respect him. Wow, incredible.
Twitter and TikTok to push out a constant barrage of viral clips.
I didn't really like the guy. I more just wanted to see if I could break his heart. It was fun.
So did you break his heart then?
I hope I did a little damage.
Why do you hope that you did a little damage?
I like humbling men.
This made the Whatever podcast the most talked about dating podcast online. However, with all of that success,
they showed Brett Cooper there. I forget if I did a reaction video. I feel like I might have recorded one. I don't remember if I uploaded it, but she has some really, really cool videos. I think I did upload it. Shout out to Brett Cooper.
as comes a lot of attention and a lot of hate.
Because I'm pretty sure the Whatever podcast is despicable.
Every time I feel like we stamp out a roach, aka a white man with a podcast like this.
For dudes with terrible opinions.
Brian, bro. I don't want any more Brian. His little voice and his little crap. The most dripless person you've ever seen in your life.
Basically. I hope that they crash and burn.
So this all begs the question, where does the hate come from and why do major publications go out of their way?
I mean, like, where does it come from? You watch, like, even the clip they just showed. I mean, you think about the production of the content that they're doing for even 1 minute, and you understand how, like, scummy and ridiculous it is, and that makes you dislike it. Like, anybody would dislike it upon watching 5 minutes of it. Anyone.
to attack the Whatever podcast? Well, it comes from the fact that the Whatever podcast does two things very well. Brian will calmly and respectfully use logic and reason to simply use their own arguments against them.
Like, just put more effort into, like,
there's so
coming
much,
up with something
There's so many
different.
things that you could do.
Just put more effort and...
Just put in more effort, says the panel of women that never planned a first date in their lives.
Ouch, they definitely didn't like that one. Please drop a like on the video if you think that modern women are completely blind to their own hypocrisy, and comment down below what you think. When someone like...
This idea of modern women, when you're talking about like 20-year-old women, do you understand that? You're talking about 20-year-old women. So yeah, maybe they're going to be a little hypocritical and a little, their ideology isn't all that well thought out compared to this like 35 pushing 40 guy. Like, yeah, I mean, that's totally makes sense. So, but to be like, oh, modern women are all like this and they're going to continue to be like this throughout their lives. It's like, it's like 40-year-old men who watch these kinds of podcasts. So like, why are they even concerned? Why are they even concerned about this? Why do they think that nobody develops from like, nobody's perspective and views change from the age of 20 to even like say 25 or 30? Because in my experience, practically every person is a totally different person at the age of 25 than they were when they were 20. And everybody who's 30 was a different person than they were when they were at the age of 25, right? Like, people grow and develop and their perspectives change, and it's just so bizarre to like refer to like modern women in this way when you're just talking about like random 20-year-olds who are willing to go on a podcast to gain more followers on their social media. Like, it's such a skewed demographic, and it's so insane to like categorize all women as this. It's quite ridiculous. It's one of the really rare examples where you can point to it where it's just genuine sexism. You're just categorizing all women based off of the opinions of a few women, and it's really dumb to do that. It's just so intellectually dishonest and absurd and kind of gross.
Brian exposes this while enjoying massive success online, then the general narrative states that he must be taken down, and the mainstream media outlets will jump at the chance to do so. Which brings us to May 2nd of 2023, when Vice dropped a poorly researched hit piece accusing the podcast of making women look dumb. Now, clearly Vice never actually watched any of the episodes, or they would have known that these women do not need any help with looking dumb.
You guys are so shallow. Shallow. I like a 6'4" guy.
6'4"?
Yes, because
5'2",
my
6'4".
last relationship, I was with a 6'4" guy.
By the way,
and
they're
he
not
was
going to see you
amazing.
there.
He was so big,
okay.
like perfect height.
Yeah.
Just perfect. Now, the article tries to frame these women as innocent little creatures that come on the podcast just to get some attention, whilst Brian, the host, is just a big mean manipulator. But in reality, Brian is actually the one who gets attacked a lot on the podcast, and not for his arguments, but simply for who he is.
My question...
I don't know, his arguments... Well, that's exactly my point, is... Well, his arguments do sometimes get attacked, but it's mostly like how he's delivering them. It's not who he is or the arguments he's making. It's like who he's making the arguments to and who he's trying to argue with, and what the overall message he's trying to send to the viewer by doing this, right? He's trying to send the message that like all women are like careless and stupid, or maybe all women who are in their 20s are like careless and stupid. And that just isn't the case, and it's bizarre, and yeah.
To you is, I disagree with you.
It's rightfully criticized.
Yeah, I bet you do,
What?
white boy. Like that's so different.
And you're white.
If-
You're literally a white man looking at me, telling me,
That's a bit racist.
Oh my god, no, you're one of those.
You don't...
I mean, it 100% is racist. Absolutely, no question. It's completely racist. I'm a Native American person, and yeah, you can't just dismiss someone's view because they're a white person or a man. I mean, he's being sexist. A lot of this core content of this podcast is quite sexist, quite dismissive towards women's perspectives. But yeah, that doesn't give the women any right to be sexist and racist towards him. Two rights do not make a wrong. You can't just judge somebody based off their race and say they're like this, or they've had such and such experiences, they must have all these privileges because of their race. That's way too far. That is racist. That is sexist. Stop doing that, people. Come on.
I don't think you can be racist towards someone who's white.
No, I don't.
This blatant form of racism conducted by so many liberal women when they don't get their way is never mentioned in any of the major publications, even though they love to constantly whine about inclusivity and equality. Now luckily, Brian is not afraid to call women out on this hypocritical and toxic behavior.
Hold on.
Okay, sure.
If there was a black girl at this table and I was attempting to dismiss her point because of her skin color, would it be my preference if a girl just didn't even have social media? Probably.
This is giving red flags. A little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
See, but here's the interesting thing is that men are not allowed to have preferences, standards, and boundaries. Nobody bats an eye when a woman says, I want XYZ in a partner. But the moment a guy says boundaries, preferences, and standards, oh, misogyny, red flag.
Now, not only does Brian protect himself very well from toxic feminists, but he also manages to protect his skin and is looking great for a guy in his late 30s. And with
Alright, just like a Teach Hanley ad.
Today's sponsor, Teach Hanley, you can do the same. With Teach Hanley, you get access to a great skincare line
I'm just gonna
that is
skip
uncomplicated panels piled on, but the story never really got any traction and died out
I might get an ad because
However, one
I don't
hater in
use ad
particular
blocker.
stood out by the name of Lila Rose, who was a content creator, and Lila first used whatever to boost her exposure, only to then turn around and bite Ryan and whatever like the true snake that she is.
Do you agree with my assessment that it takes these women and just makes fun of them, and it just feeds angry men?
I think it does a lot of that, but I don't know that the host has a fully developed worldview.
Is he a Christian?
I don't think so. Yeah.
That would help.
This woman is giving new meaning to the term speaking with forked tongue, because when she was reviewing her experience on the Whatever podcast with Ruslan, she had a completely different story.
Yeah, I think it's such a unique place on the internet to have a space where people from extraordinary...
I mean, it's possible that just her perspective on it changed. Like maybe she consumed more of the content and changed her opinion and her viewpoint.
Really different backgrounds and
I don't know anything about her.
Sets are coming together to talk very candidly and in a very vulnerable way, I feel. I mean, the people just kind of sharing about their very personal lives in a way that is not there to like shame each other. I don't think that that's not my experience on the show anyways.
Do you agree with my assessment that it takes these women and just makes fun of them, and it just feeds angry men?
I think it does a lot of that.
It's like people generally, they're very courteous with each other.
I think there's a tendency to objectify women. Like even some of the things that the host did, I didn't approve of. I didn't like what he did.
No, I don't agree with her that a lot of the viewership is just like angry men who are getting like confirmation bias. I think that really stupid and there's really stupid and misguided men who are kind of getting that, but I don't think like it's like this angry, hateful thing. I think a lot of guys, they just genuinely want to understand women better. And a podcast where there's a bunch of women, it kind of makes sense that maybe you'd get a little bit more of that perspective. And that's kind of what the podcast should be focused on. It's just getting women's perspective. Not saying you can't like challenge them, especially when they're being specifically ridiculous and absurd, but to like always be challenging them when they're 20 and they just have no like life experience and there's no reason for them to have really like thought out their viewpoints. Like it just comes across it's such like small wiener energy to be like, I'm gonna out debate these 20-year-olds who had zero preparation. Like chill out, dude. Maybe focus on like positivity and
I don't think he has to do that for the podcast.
So after her claiming it was a waste of time and that the host is exploiting vulnerable women, she then goes back on the podcast 2 more times, once in June and once in August, and continues to milk the podcast like crazy for clips and content for both of her channels, while fully understanding how this all benefits her.
Podcast exploration thing, which is very exciting.
And you've since blown up.
We're growing, thank God. Yeah, we've got amazing listeners.
red pill space.
Yeah.
You're like a household name now.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, is whatever like red pill?
This woman is just like the OF and Instagram models that she despises that go on whatever just to go viral, hoping to boost their socials and make lots of money.
My understanding of the podcast was they're bringing these women in.
I think these podcasts also like leech followers from these women, right? Because these women often have like hundreds of thousands of followers on their social media, and a lot of those say they're guys who are paying for their premium subscriptions. Those guys are doing that because they're getting this like parasocial relationship out of it. So if this woman likely is promoting herself and her upcoming appearance on the podcast, that is going to cause a lot of her dedicated viewers to go over and watch that podcast. So from just a getting lots of views perspective, it's a really smart idea. It's just weird, and maybe I should even do it, where I just do one where it actually has a positive vibe, where it's about positivity and like growing, or at least having like reasonable, more human conversations instead of this weird combative like wiener measuring contest with random 20-year-old women
who don't know at all what they're talking about and making them look like idiots.
Now it's funny how this moron is basically repeating the Vice article verbatim as if he wrote the damn thing, because just like the writer of the Vice article, he hasn't even watched the podcast himself except for 20 seconds of clips.
That was the like 10 second, or maybe I've watched like 2 or 3 clips.
I think
that's
they've
what
done,
it looked like.
I mean, talk about the pot calling the kettle black, since this guy's whole argument is about how the whatever podcast is only inviting uneducated idiots to talk about topics that they have no knowledge of, while he hasn't even watched the podcast and has no idea what's actually going on. And so you see, these are the types of snakes that attack the whatever podcast and will write articles such as the Vice and New York articles about making women look bad, all while never even watching the episodes. But what's even more noticeable is...
Yeah, it's true that I think I watched like half of an episode once, and they were nicer than what is clipped out. Obviously, the parts where they're very combative is what gets clipped out and shown to people. I'm sure the podcast is actually quite a bit more positive than that, but it just has such a negative... You just get so much negativity in those clips that I can't really imagine it, the overall focus, being a good one.
Is that this constant crying about whatever making women look bad is completely missing the point, which is that the only reason why these women look bad is because they are trying to defend idiotic feminist propaganda, which is completely void of logic and based entirely on feelings.
You guys are all just like really misogynistic.
How do you define misogyny?
I think the misogyny of this podcast is super subtle, and these women just have a difficult time really defining it. And that's all it is, right? Like, I feel like I've defined it pretty clearly in this video, and they just haven't given it that much thought. As you can see here, that's why they just never really have any follow-up to what they say. And a lot of what they say is obviously ridiculous and wrong, and their perspectives are totally different than mine.
I don't know, I don't like this.
Now, another important point to make here.
Because, like, misogyny isn't necessarily just, oh, I hate all women are scum, I think women should have these rights taken away. That's not what misogyny is. Like, just like anything else. Just like the, like, soft racism and sexism towards him and the soft sexism that he has towards women, it's all very subtle, right? It's not having that like bias and disdain for a group of people. It comes out in ways such as trying to make them all look dumb, lumping them all in one group.
And one that proves that the majority of haters has never actually watched the whatever podcast is that many of the episodes actually feature a lot of intelligent women that are excellent at voicing their opinion and will wipe the floor with other women that only operate on feelings.
Like I said, my whole thing is I think feminism is very counterproductive to women. And like even going into a whole nother aspect of this, when I see actual civil rights deterioration for women, which is what feminism should stand up for.
Obviously evolved now. And it's like, it's your choice. Like, yeah, if you're a girl and you want to have a job, go have a job. But in no way or shape or form, like, is it shameful to be a housewife?
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but we also have to always acknowledge that that's a luxury that so many women don't have. And so like feminism, there's aspects of feminism that do benefit women, just like there's
Weird.
aspects of feminism that might hurt women and hurt men.
And so clearly, the women who use facts and logic actually come off looking very good, since they look poised and knowledgeable and are great at debating different issues, which proves that the Whatever podcast,
and they're usually like several years older than the 20-year-olds that they're arguing with. Just because it's women doing it doesn't mean it's not like kind of sexist and ridiculous. Like, I feel like you're kind of missing the point here that they bring on some women who logically are going to out debate these women who haven't thought out their viewpoints. And yeah, you can say once these women do develop a worldview and think out their ideology, that it's going to change. Of course it is. Like, that's if the focus of the podcast was just all of the people around this table are talking about their ideology, talking about ideas, and like all learning and growing. If that was the focus, it'd be not as negatively looked upon as it is. But having the focus continually be so like it's not well structured.
Out here trying to make women look dumb, but it's about debunking feminist propaganda and the hypocrisy that exists in society today when it comes to dating and relationships. Now, the counter argument that you'll hear a lot is that all the viral clips.
But if you were going to do that, why wouldn't you just have people who are solely interested in talking about that and actually have well thought out viewpoints, right? I don't know, it's just disingenuous to pretend like the goal of this podcast isn't to get these like combative clips that get shared around, these popular clips. That is the entire purpose, and it's clear. Stop pretending like this is about like figuring out dating and everyone advancing, right? That's not what's going on here.
Are of women looking dumb and not of women looking poised and making excellent points. Well, to that I say, you cannot control what goes viral because society and the algorithm do. And so you can't then blame Brian for picking clips that are most likely to go viral to best promote his podcast, since in the end it is his full-time job. So just like companies,
but it's scummy. Like, it's scummy to do that.
Use shiny things.
Like I'm sorry, but you post something publicly with the intention of a lot of people seeing it, and then you play victim and you get some backlash. Like, why are you simping so hard for this guy? Just because you get some criticism online? Like, settle down a little bit there, bud.
To lure you in with their commercials, the Whatever podcast uses the most likely to...
Like, it's insane to watch a podcast where a guy is constantly criticizing other people's views, and then when people criticize his views and what he's doing, oh no, that's too much. Oh yeah, like he doesn't control all these things. It's not his fault that he like does this content. Like, what? Are you joking?
Go viral clips to lure you in, and then to later get you involved in the larger conversation about dating and life.
Why would I need to have that conversation? Like, why would I need to have that conversation specifically between like a 40-year-old guy and a bunch of 20-year-old women? That's like that's the dumbest way possible to have that conversation. That's the issue. That's why I never watched more than like half of one episode of this, is because you watch half of one episode and you don't even have to watch the other half of that episode. You know what it's going to be about. It's going to be about a 40-year-old man talking about dating and whatever in society and OnlyFans with a bunch of 20-year-olds. Like, that's such a shallow conversation, and he's just having it over and over and over and over again. And it's lazy content, it's exploitive, it's scummy, and it deserves criticism, and that's what it gets. To act like that shouldn't be happening is just dumb. Like, if you genuinely watch this kind of crap and you think, oh, this is such elevated content, I'm really, I'm a part of this overall big discussion, and all these other viewers are part of this big discussion, and we're so like progressive and forward thinking, and this is just advancing all these people. It's not. Like, it's so dumb. Why would it have to every single time the discussion has to every time be a 40-year-old man and a bunch of 20-year-old women? That's so ridiculous. Like, think about it for just a moment. Think about how dumb that is. Think about how counterintuitive that is to having like a detailed discussion. What would actually give you a detailed discussion would be having a huge variety of age ranges and type of people. Maybe people from like different parts of the world. And yeah, sometimes they have people from different parts of the world. Sometimes they have men, they have these guests. But to act like it's this deep discussion, like this is some deep content, it's not. It's not at all. This is like the most shallow Jerry Springer crap out there. It's just like, come on. Gonna talk about facts and logic. Oh, like the whatever podcast is just the go-to place for facts and logic. Like, oh my God, I'm sorry, but you would have to be, I couldn't imagine anybody besides like 12-year-olds to 18-year-old boys thinking that the whatever podcast is loaded with facts and logic. Like, Jesus.
In general. Now, the problem isn't Brian or the whatever podcast, but it is the fact that modern women are lying to younger women, filling their heads with a bunch of delusional beliefs. The big one being you can do whatever you want and that people will have to like you and date you as if consequences do not exist and you can just make up your own reality.
And like, this is so very similar to like the white savior complex. Now, I don't really buy the white savior complex too much. I mean, yeah, obviously that exists in like leftist white people. They like to talk for minorities. And that kind of is an issue, I guess. I do believe that exists. But I feel like this kind of crap is a way bigger example of that, where you're just this male. You have this male savior complex where, oh no, I must save these 20-year-old women. That is such a noble and true goal of mine. I am the savior of the 20-year-old women, the 20-year-old Instagram models. I am their savior. I will save them from the horrible feminism. Like, yeah, these women, their worldview, that worldview that's being preached at them, it's stupid and it's wrong. And yeah, guess what? It's going to damage their dating lives. It's going to damage their relationships. But why do you have to be their savior? Like, it's so ridiculous and condescending. Like, guess what? They're going to realize themselves that ideology is not leading them to where they want to go. Right? It's so weird to like take up that mantle and act like you're so noble and so smart and so full of facts and logic.
They will get very angry since
grow up. Like, a lot of these viewers and these people who get so like butthurt about the Fresh and Fit podcast or the whatever podcast, you really, really need to grow up and reflect on this.
No one ever told them no or told them that they were wrong and were engaging in undesirable behavior. Now, to be fair, the whatever podcast is not without blame for some of the criticism it's receiving, since Brian has made some serious mistakes.
Because they post it publicly, so you absolutely put yourself out there for criticism when you're posting something publicly to the entire world. Like,
takes on the podcast
to expect to get zero criticism when you post something worldwide is absolutely ridiculous.
Easy for his critics
and to play the
hate
victim when you receive that criticism.
Misogyny. For example, when he had this guy on the podcast who is an absolute douchebag and a certified creep with some crazy extracurricular activities that I can't even mention on this platform, he actually caused the entire show to turn to shit due to the men defending a terrible stance on staying in certain relationships. Now, this is exactly what I meant when I said that the women make themselves look bad when they argue illogical beliefs. Because when you are defending stupidity, there's just no way you're gonna come out looking good. Now, obviously, this does not happen often on the podcast, but when it does happen, it's these types of examples that will be used to paint the entire...
Shout out to Destiny there, the guy with the dyed hair. He's actually like often changes his perspectives and gives like really well thought out arguments. I don't always agree with them, but he's actually like intellectually honest, unlike probably anybody you see in frame here. I don't know anything about these people, but I assume they're foolish.
Podcast as a women bashing hellhole. Brian has managed to create a very nice product with the Whatever podcast that he should definitely be proud of and that he should protect with his life. Because in today's climate, you have to carefully screen your guest to make sure that the discussion does not get out of control, since this only opens...
Kermit the Frog here. I teach in Toronto, and I'm the biggest victim in the world.
him up to demonetization and deplatforming. Now, in today's climate, it really doesn't take much.
I like Jordan Peterson. People have the weirdest perspective on him, though. They're like, all these guys look up to him. He's the pinnacle of masculinity. This like twerpy like college professor, this skinny old man who's a professor in Toronto, at the University of Toronto. If you've never been to Canada, Toronto is like, it's like the LA or the New York of Canada, where anybody from there you just kind of dismiss as like a leftist lunatic. And Jordan Peterson himself has some of those like personality traits that you would expect from a kind of like liberal hellhole like that. And he's just like super, pretty well the opposite of what you think when you think of like a left-wing kind of guy. I mean, a right-wing kind of guy. A right-wing kind of guy. Jordan Peterson is the opposite.
Monetized or even deplatformed, since
and he's also like super like, I don't know if he's necessarily religious specifically, but he has a lot of those religious old mentality kind of thing. So he's very like puritanical, and that's just so in conflict with like modern people, especially young people.
Simply having a podcast and being a man is already a bad thing in itself. The New York Times even wrote an article about this titled, "Would You Date a Podcast Bro?" which is all about how it is a red flag to...
Another thing, even when feminism was at its height, when it was really gaining kind of like this political power and steam, before it turned over to this like woke nightmare of like being about something differently. Prior to woke, the big woke, the equivalent was feminism. It's gaining traction, it was gaining steam. You had these big YouTube channels popping up. It was kind of like gaining popularity. Even at like its height, it was maybe just over 10% of women considered themselves feminists. Like, think about how genuinely unpopular that is. Just because they were carving out their like tiny corner of the internet still doesn't really mean anything, right? Like, yeah, for a brief time they were gaining quite a bit of traction, right? They were getting things done in their activism, but that was for like a really brief time. And especially with like the wokies, they kind of people have a really negative perspective of the woke crowd and of feminism. I feel like the negativity that came with the woke people kind of brought down the popularity of feminism even further. I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that more women identify as being like specifically not a feminist than the amount of women who identify as a feminist, which is kind of funny.
Simply have a podcast and exist as a man. And the men with podcasts are full of themselves and are contributing nothing to society. Which all just proves the true motivation behind the whatever attacks, which is that women with podcasts are good and men with podcasts are bad. Women are constantly getting away with saying the most vile and misandrous things about men, and they are never getting criticized for it. In fact, they actually...
Except for like this video you're making right now or the existence of the whatever podcast or the Fresh and Fit podcast or anything that whole sphere of content. Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, like Nick Fuentes, Sneeko. I don't know, there's a ton of these guys, and yeah, they do receive criticism. Again, they have an equally adds like ridiculous and victimhood mentality where they immediately make themselves the victim. Like, what? I'm receiving criticism? I posted this worldwide and people are criticizing my ridiculous viewpoints? No way. Like, yeah, they also do that, but yeah, to just act like they never get any criticism is crazy and incorrect. I'm sorry, but you're just wrong here.
Actually get celebrated and are called brave and fearless.
Yeah, they celebrate each other. Like, on rare occasion. Usually women are tearing each other down for the most part. But yeah, some of them in small circles online, they praise each other for this kind of stuff. Well, you're making a whole video like patting the whatever podcast on the back, and there's all kinds of men doing the exact same thing, dude. Like, get some perspective. Like,
which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, on the surface, the two articles attacking Brian and whatever podcast might seem like a small bump on the road. However, as we've seen time and time again on YouTube, whenever a major publication starts writing about a creator in a negative way, the platform gets very upset quickly and will start to make the creator's life a living hell. You often see impressions nosedive, random videos getting demonetized, and sometimes even strikes popping up out of nowhere on videos that have been on the platform for years. The Vice article in May perfectly correlates with a massive drop in views in the same month, and the additional piling on in the months after explain why the podcast is now struggling to get back to its previous highs. It is obvious that the success of the whatever podcast.
Now, granted, these problems that come up, right? These strikes to these channels, these demonetizations, or just flat out removals like the Fresh and Fit podcast, I actually totally disagree with those happening. Like, that really sucks. Like, I understand YouTube's a company, or whatever platform, they're a company, they have to make money, and they can choose who they allow and who they don't. But I think that does suck quite a bit. I think that people should be free to have whatever viewpoint they want to have, but that viewpoint should absolutely be criticized. But yeah, I'm just against totally removing a channel or demonetizing. Because say the Fresh and Fit podcast, say you just totally demonetize their channel, they have other ways to get money. Just even in this video, he has a Teach Hanley promotion in it, and like Fresh and Fit podcast can do that. They can just literally, especially being a podcast where there's plenty of time, you're doing plenty of talking, they can shout out like multiple sponsors throughout it. They can then have like a Patreon or whatever it is. They can sell merchandise, which they do. They have so many other ways to make money. And yeah, it sucks that they're hugely that there's a giant roadblock to them making money by even just being demonetized. But yeah, I think demonetization for specifically the Fresh and Fit podcast, I think maybe they should have been demonetized for maybe a month at a time, when they have a content that, like, they say they upload something that's particularly over the top and breaks multiple rules, then yeah, maybe demonetize them for a short time, but bring back their monetization. Definitely don't remove them unless someone's like posting stuff that's like crazy, like
podcast and the following
beheadings
text
or
is yet another example
being committed,
of society and a particular feminist
just a viewpoint,
not being able to handle when they are outed for doing the very same thing they love to.
You kind of give them more. You give more value to their viewpoints by removing them from the platform, right? You're giving them that victim narrative that they genuinely, desperately desire by removing them. You're giving them that victim card, and they will play it, and they do play it.
Now, the point of the Whatever podcast is not to make women look bad. It is to challenge people on their own beliefs and arguments, especially...
Again, like Candace Owens, like, how old is she? And this is kind of her career. Like Candace Owens is it. She's made a career out of being like a political pundit or whatever. She talks about a huge variety of topics, and she's really, really good at it. You really think it's like reasonable or fair to like really to have her really challenge a 20-year-old's perspective on the world? Like,
Actually,
I don't know.
They make it their life's purpose. If you're going
It's
to be
just
loud
dumb.
about the existence of
It's
a
more
patriarchy
dumb than it is
or calling
exploitive.
everything misogyny, then you should at least know what you're talking about and understand the words that you're using. Since if you go on a podcast and say nothing but nonsense for 3 or 5 hours straight, then selecting 1 or 2 clips for a teaser is not making you look dumb, you simply are dumb. This was Why the Whatever podcast.
And it would be infinitely more, it would be less offensive to people if you just allowed these guests on the podcast for their own stupid opinions to get criticism from the audience than to just directly give them criticism face to face. Like, yeah, they then wouldn't have to like own up and then say nothing when you challenge their perspective. But to act like it's a conversation, how is it a conversation when like you're there, a 20-year-old has a really dumb worldview, they express that worldview, you say something that challenges it, that they can't really argue against, and then they don't give an argument against it, they say nothing. How is that a conversation? That's not a conversation. That's so separated from a conversation. It's crazy that people can't see that. And again, you would be way better off like bringing up that kind of topic again with another set of people the next time. Maybe have a diverse set of people. And like they never bring up the topic in a way that I feel like really breeds deep conversation. It's always so one-sided. It's just this 40-year-old man talking like over these women, and a lot of the times, like a lot of times they don't even care what he's talking about, or they definitely don't care to like argue what he's talking about a lot of the time. Like so often they're willing to just change their perspective. But yeah, the Whatever podcast, I didn't think I'd end up criticizing it this much, but they post their stuff publicly worldwide. They deserve criticism. Again, this is Why the Whatever podcast is under attack by FE Capital. It was a well-made video, nothing against you at all. I just really do not like the lack of honesty or like deep analysis of what this podcast genuinely is, what the content is, what the point is. I think trying to have a conversation about dating, this is just not the way to do it at all. Peace out. Have a good one. I'll be back with more videos. Hope you like it.